Charlotte Madison never apologized. She judged everyone on those New York streets purely by appearances. Until her pristine Bentley rear-ended a battered old coupe driven by a single dad named Mason Carter. She stepped out without missing a beat, checkbook already waiting. Ready to throw cash at the problem, assuming his cheap car meant a quick payoff. But when Mason opened the trunk of that supposedly ancient Aston Martin DB5, Charlotte froze solid. She didn't find a spare tire or some dusty luggage. Instead, she stared at hidden radar arrays and glowing biometric locks. Encrypted screens and high-tech defense systems stopped her right in her tracks. You and I are about to learn a lesson today. What Mason Carter hides will completely shatter your assumptions. That morning began like every other day for the wealthy Charlotte Madison. Flawlessly, efficiently, and strictly following her very own rules. Her entire schedule for that October Tuesday was locked in 3 weeks ahead of time. A 9 o'clock legal review, followed by a 10:30 tour of the demo floor. Then a noon ceremony to sign a massive contract worth $1.4 billion with 3 of the biggest car makers around. Charlotte controlled Meridian Dynamics completely, one of the nation's most relentless and innovative self-driving car companies. She transformed one single ambitious patent into a massive corporate empire in just under 9 years. 37 years old, sharp as a knife, and totally intolerant of anyone wasting her time. Nothing on the surface showed that anything would go wrong. Her personal driver, a quiet guy named Gerald, had served her faithfully for 6 years. He steered the Bentley through Midtown Manhattan until a delivery truck drifted across 48th Street without signaling. Gerald swerved hard to dodge the crash that sent the Bentley sweeping right into the driver's side of a pearl gray Aston Martin DB5 sitting quietly by the curb. The impact made a harsh, ugly shriek of metal crushing metal. It turned heads on the New York sidewalk, grabbing the attention of folks who normally look away. Charlotte felt the sudden jolt in her spine before her brain truly processed the accident. Gerald started apologizing immediately. Charlotte was already throwing off her seatbelt. She stepped out of the Bentley, projecting the polished, practiced calm of a true corporate boss. Looking purely at the surface, she assumed the problem was easily fixed. The beat-up Aston Martin showed deep dents along the side door and the rear quarter. To her judging eyes, the car just looked like trash. Its pearl gray paint had faded out into dull, powdery chalk. The chrome trim looked like dirty old coins, and the window seals were rotting away at the edges. You or I might look at it and see junkyard scrap, exactly like she arrogantly did. She quickly snatched a business card from the pocket of her expensive blazer, already putting a dollar value on the man. She assumed his worth was low, market value plus 20%, maybe a voucher to shut him up. Then Mason Carter walked down the steps of a nearby brownstone. His young daughter, maybe 8 or 9 years old, followed closely beside him carrying a heavy school backpack. He looked remarkably ordinary, tall, completely unhurried, wearing a cheap canvas jacket and a plain shirt. He seemed like an invisible guy, moving through life without drawing any real attention. He checked the crushed DB5 without showing any anger and absolutely no signs of panic. Instead, his quiet eyes were calculating everything. You and I know appearances lie. He remained completely cool. He gently asked his little girl to wait on the steps. She sat without any fuss. Charlotte mistook his deep, quiet authority for simple parenting skills. Charlotte introduced herself, handing him her sleek card. She spoke in that brisk, dismissive tone she used for vendors, promising to easily cover the car repairs and any minor inconvenience. She offered cash. This unassuming man ignored her expensive card. He slowly paced around the battered classic car, crouching down to inspect the heavy damage near the door seam. He pressed his thumb against the smashed metal, checking something completely unseen. Standing up, he calmly stated he had to check the old car's internal systems before doing anything. Charlotte casually agreed, foolishly assuming he just meant an old engine or flat tire. Checking her watch, she figured she had 47 minutes until her big meeting. What he did next was not fine. It entirely shattered every arrogant assumption the busy executive had just made. He reached right through the open window, tapping a plain spot on the dashboard that looked to outsiders like cheap decorative trim. Just a basic strip of brushed metal sitting right above the glove box. He entered a highly specific code. 3 quick taps, then a long press, and the ordinary old interior completely transformed. A hidden blue light flickered beneath the dusty dashboard. The simple rearview mirror split down a completely invisible seam, revealing a high-tech digital display screen inside. A powerful low hum woke beneath the rusty chassis. Steady and focused, this battered machine had awakened. Charlotte stood frozen on the sidewalk. Everything she assumed about this unassuming man and his junk car vanished in 4 seconds of pure, complicated shock. The hidden system running through. That ugly, battered car was secretly running an advanced diagnostic. Charlotte watched the hidden screen in disbelief as it scanned the rusty frame for damage, verifying signal strength across heavily guarded encrypted channels, making absolutely sure no one had secretly planted tracking bugs during the minor street crash. Let's think about this. She recognized the structure, if not the exact hardware code, but the core philosophy, the intense, layered approach to hidden vehicle defense. How this supposedly cheap junker acted like an incredibly valuable asset and military intelligence hub. She had actually seen something nearly identical to this before, hidden inside her protected server room, in a top-secret tech prototype file that quietly vanished 8 months ago. Normally, the wealthy executive never rattled easily. She had survived hostile corporate takeovers and aggressive investigations. Even a massive product failure that cost a huge government contract and almost destroyed her entire tech company from the ground up. She had walked away from every single disaster feeling colder, much sharper, trusting her money and power to control everything. Yet standing on 48th Street, watching a dusty old classic car suddenly run. Top-tier security protocols she never thought existed outside a highly classified development lab. You and I know this feeling. The sudden terror of realizing you are hopelessly outmatched. She asked this seemingly ordinary man exactly where he got it. Her voice stayed professional, but carried a sharp edge, proving she wasn't treating him like a nobody anymore. Mason calmly closed the rusted car door, studying the arrogant CEO for a long moment before answering. He claimed that beat-up old car was just a relic from some long-forgotten project. He insisted it wasn't worth discussing, brushing it off as completely unrelated to the crash. Charlotte saw past the surface. She said it mattered he didn't push back. Instead, he calmly suggested that some histories should stay buried, and if she really wanted to scrutinize a company's hidden security flaws, she ought to start looking right in her own backyard. That warning hit her hard, the precision of a key turning quietly in a lock. Charlotte studied the unassuming man's face, no hint of malice. No arrogant posturing, no attempt to exploit a wealthy CEO. He delivered the truth plainly, like a doctor giving a diagnosis, because theatrics change absolutely nothing. She needed a name to match the face. He simply told her he was Mason Carter. She warned him her corporate team would dig into his past, look under the hood. He welcomed it, warning her the surface would look empty, and he was entirely right. Once back in her luxury Bentley, her assistant's report came through. The man's file was so incredibly bare it was a giant red flag. Mason Carter, 42, a licensed mechanical and systems engineer on paper. No fancy corporate job titles. One old tech patent for vehicle shielding from 11 years back, then complete radio silence. His resume just stopped, no recent jobs, no active professional licenses. No shiny conference badges, zero industry gossip. You and I know what that means. The guy looked invisible because he worked very hard to erase himself. Charlotte recognized the illusion. She knew ordinary looks usually mask extraordinary secrets, people hiding deep sins or survivors protecting themselves from dangerous threats. She had her driver spin the luxury car around immediately. Mason was still by that dented car, scanning the door with a strange little handheld gadget Charlotte had never seen. He swept it quietly along the bottom edge of the metal. His daughter sat on the steps, looking like any normal kid glued to a tablet. Stepping out again, Charlotte dropped the intimidating executive act. She told this ordinary-looking dad he deserved a real conversation, not just a hush-money check. He stood up. He just watched her for a second, his face completely unbothered. Then he warned her that her flawless, expensive luxury vehicle held a very dark little secret. He strolled over to the pristine front of her Bentley. Without asking, the mechanic knelt right beside the expensive driver's side wheel well. He reached deep into the hidden undercarriage, pulling out a tiny speck between his fingers. A hidden device barely the size of a simple coat button. Matte black, one tiny embedded contact point. He held it up. Charlotte's legal background and decades in the tech industry meant one thing. She didn't need anyone to explain what this harmless-looking piece of plastic really was. A live tracking and data interception bug, actively broadcasting her every move. Here's where you and I see the twist. He flipped it over. 3 tiny letters stamped into the dark housing. Charlotte instantly recognized the corporate logo. It was the secret internal code belonging exclusively to her own hardware procurement division. That tiny chip originated deep inside her own trusted company. Charlotte stood frozen on that bright October sidewalk. She quickly processed this new reality, processing it all with the cold efficiency she applied to every crisis. But beneath that powerful exterior, pure icy panic was finally waking up. Whoever slapped that cheap-looking bug on her luxury car had total access to her kingdom. Beneath the surface, someone clearly knew her route, tracking the CEO's daily movements for days, maybe even weeks. You and I know appearances deceive. This minor traffic collision was no accident. The delivery truck that swerved into her lane was already gone, melting seamlessly back into the crowded city streets. She initially noticed that detail, but quickly brushed it off. She certainly wasn't dismissing it anymore. The single father pocketed the microchip in a sealed sleeve, exactly like those used to preserve digital evidence. This unassuming man had come fully prepared for exactly this scenario. The wealthy executive finally looked past his worn clothes, completely erasing everything she had assumed during their first 3 minutes. Regardless of how he looked, Mason Carter was neither a helpless victim nor a relic. This was a man who had been patiently observing, waiting. He stayed miles ahead of a dangerous corporate setup she was just starting to piece together. They sat inside his battered Aston Martin, while the busy city outside ignored them completely, blind to the truth. The cabin wasn't polished to look flashy. It was spotless like a mechanic's workspace, because true precision demands absolute order. The original vintage leather looked worn, yet perfectly intact. The analog dashboard gauges were period correct and completely genuine. Yet hidden firmly behind the glove box, tucked under the armrest and wired into the doors, sat advanced systems that had no business inside a 60-year-old vintage car. Tiny optic cameras and a biometric lock wired directly into the ignition. A heavy electromagnetic defense shield was forged under those rusted outer panels, plus a hidden signal blocker that Mason casually referred to as a counterintelligence defense array. The CEO quietly asked him who actually financed this upgrade. You and I can finally see his real value. He spent 7 years handcrafting it alone, sourcing rare parts through dead markets. The origin story he shared wasn't the whole truth, though. He spoke cautiously, revealing only what was strictly necessary, like a guarded man letting a stranger into his hallway, but it painted a clear picture. 12 years ago, this unassuming man was the top systems engineer running a classified automotive defense program for a wealthy private security group. The secret project was right in its final development stage when a trusted insider betrayed the operation. A supposed friend inside sold the primary tech blueprints to a wealthy corporate rival. The terrible fallout wasn't just standard corporate theft, it was deadly. A critical driving test was violently rigged. 2 of his brilliant engineers were killed. The official investigation was deliberately rigged to find absolutely nothing. The truth was buried fast under ironclad non-disclosure agreements. The backers scrapped the project and quietly paid off the grieving families to buy their silence. Mason was completely cleared, but proving his innocence meant watching his entire life's work get destroyed. He quit the lucrative tech world forever, packed up his infant daughter, barely 2 years old back then, and vanished into a quiet, ordinary life. His young wife passed away 8 months after the betrayal, killed in what Mason dryly called a routine traffic collision. But seeing the dark intensity in his eyes proved he never once believed her tragic death was just a simple stroke of bad luck. He hadn't rebuilt that rusty old classic car to show off nor to strike back. It was his ultimate hidden insurance policy. A mobile fortress designed just in case the wealthy criminals who ruined his past ever circled back. It gave this seemingly average guy the invisible power to record, verify, and fiercely defend his family. Charlotte listened in pure silence. You and I see the truth. She silently logged every technical detail, the timeline, and the heavy names he left totally unspoken. You and I know looks can be deceiving. Since Charlotte saw that old dashboard light up, her unease had shifted into outright shock. She was questioning her morning, rethinking her entire year, tearing down the polished illusions she held tightly since founding Meridian Dynamics. She thought she ruled this tech landscape. Then the battered DB5 system flagged something fresh during their chat. This unassuming father studied the screen like a doctor checking a critical heartbeat. A silent, invisible cyber attack had just struck the heavily guarded servers of Meridian within the last 40 minutes. The breach was precise, totally invisible, disguised as ordinary maintenance traffic to easily fool the most expensive corporate security tools. Her elite security team saw nothing. This old car caught it. He pulled the data onto his rearview mirror, exposing the hidden attack trace. The hidden data packets, tricky timing intervals, and the slick bypass method. Charlotte recognized this deeply buried vulnerability. Her high-paid team had flagged it for a vital patch 7 months prior, ignored by the men on her shiny corporate oversight board, trapped in a bureaucratic review that stalled. Hidden in the amber logs of this vintage DB5 sat a specific user tag. It wasn't a real person at all, just a digital phantom. A fake credential stitched together from real profiles in her company directory. But the method left a hidden fingerprint, and Mason's battered system matched it to a deep threat from his past. He finally named him. Calmly, like he was reading the daily weather forecast, Jason Hunter. Charlotte knew that flashy name. The whole tech auto industry worshipped him. Jason Hunter ran Helios Automotive Intelligence, a polished rival copying Meridian for 3 years, mirroring every shiny new product launch, blocking her patents with their own shady filings arriving just days later. The corporate suits naively called it standard parallel innovation, a natural coincidence when smart teams chase the exact same shiny technical prize. Charlotte used to find it merely annoying. Let's pause here, we both see the ugly truth now. She asked how this famous boss connected to Mason's dark past, the secret program, the sabotage, the fire that ruined him. This unassuming father went completely, heavily silent. He explained Hunter wasn't directly involved in that shiny core project. Just a background consultant exploiting his quiet access to the vendor supply chains. A nobody who learned enough to turn deadly, staying hidden behind a boring, highly respectable corporate mask for years. Mason admitted he suspected this rich tech darling for years. But guessing without proof was a costly mistake he learned to handle with quiet patience. This rusted car's computer finally held the hard proof. A powerful boss like Charlotte never asked average people for help. It wasn't standard arrogance driving her cold exterior. It was armor, forged from watching what happens when strong leaders look weak behind their expensive desks, whenever they showed genuine human doubt to corporate wolves. So what's our takeaway? This glossy tech world only respects bulletproof confidence. The realization just hit me, and everything else followed. I had built my CEO reputation on looking like I had every problem already solved, even when I was figuring it out live. The thought of sitting inside. Picture this with me, an old car in Manhattan, asking a guy I just met for help. Trusting him to save my company from a blind spot threat was, by any normal executive standard I used, completely absurd. A totally unacceptable risk, but I did it anyway. I looked at Mason and asked for his help. I said it straight. No corporate spin, no careful framing I usually rely on to make a desperate plea sound like an offer. He just listened quietly, didn't immediately say yes. And he didn't fake hesitation just to squeeze me. He stared through the dusty windshield at the city outside, just watching New York do its thing. Moving, grinding, totally indifferent. Then he gave me 2 conditions. First, his daughter stayed out of it entirely. Never mentioned, never brought anywhere near the chaos that was about to unfold. The second rule was that I followed his lead without any corporate negotiating when seconds mattered. He knew giving up control was hard for me. I didn't even try to argue. We spent an hour inside that battered DB5 sorting the raw data his unexpected system compiled. The truth that emerged was precise and honestly, painfully obvious looking back now, which is the hallmark of a truly brilliant corporate scam. Jason Hunter wasn't just stealing tech. Stick with me here, he was building a trap. My noon signing ceremony was the main event of it, right during the live demo segment, the part where my engineers would showcase the self-driving system tackling a really tough city route. Hunter actually planned to trigger a poisoned version of our core algorithm that his guys spent months crafting from stolen blueprints. This hacked code wouldn't just quietly crash. It would fail violently, creating highly erratic and genuinely dangerous moves. And it would look exactly like my own company's software making fatal, catastrophic driving choices on camera. The big investors, who were ready to sign a $1.4 billion deal, would watch my autonomous cars swerve, speed up randomly, ignoring all override commands. Their legal teams would instantly tell them to bail. The feds that Hunter secretly tipped off would launch massive emergency safety probes. My company would never survive that deadly PR combo. He dressed it up perfectly. It looked like rushed tech and sloppy testing from the outside. Exactly the story my loudest critics had been pushing for months. Now fully armed with very real-looking digital evidence and a doomed live demo to seal it. I just sat there in that worn seat, letting myself briefly feel the crushing weight of how close I came to losing everything from pure, arrogant ignorance. I looked right over at Mason, cross-referencing data on a cracked screen with the absolute calm of a guy defusing a bomb asleep. You and I forget this sometimes. Real brilliance rarely wears a shiny suit. It doesn't perform. He wasn't trying to impress me. He wasn't demanding a trophy to prove his own worth. Let me tell you, true worth rarely flashes brightly. Mason attacked the issue like a man who had already paid the ultimate price for underestimating a threat, vowing never to repeat that mistake. For 9 years, Charlotte had kept brilliant, polished people in her orbit. Top-tier engineers, lawyers, strategists, analysts. Yet she chose them mainly for their predictable loyalty and shiny credentials. Their readiness to stay inside the neat boxes she managed. Mason, though unassuming, worked entirely outside those carefully constructed walls. He wasn't intimidated by her massive wealth, nor was he dazzled by it. He was just there fixing a crucial issue, simply because he knew the real stakes involved. The flashy signing event took place inside the lavish Meridian Dynamics Tower on 6th Avenue. 22 stories high, featuring expansive floor-to-ceiling glass on 2 sides. You've seen these rooms. Built purely for appearances, screaming victory before the real substance is ever tested. 112 people gathered by 11:45, mostly automotive executives. Wealthy institutional investors and technology press reporters. 2 powerful congressmen leading the nation's transportation infrastructure committees, plus several sharp industry analysts who had published endless pages debating exactly whether Meridian's fancy new system was actually prepared for commercial rollout. Jason Hunter strolled in at 11:15. He gave Charlotte a practiced, superficial smile and a handshake, projecting fake admiration and total confidence in the outcome. She matched his hollow professional warmth perfectly, offering a polite smile but nothing substantive. Notice this with me. Charlotte made one very telling schedule adjustment. She took the battered Aston Martin DB5. Gerald brought the Bentley. Mason parked the unassuming DB5 in the gloomy basement loading dock. It's secretly linked to the tower's network via a hardwired port. Her IT manager, one of 3 true allies she actually trusted after that morning's ugly truths, had quietly rigged, disguised as a totally standard infrastructure check. A handful of folks on the sidewalk. They judged the battered old car entering the bay, making quick dismissive remarks the way city people mock things that lack obvious shine. The big demonstration was slated to start at 12:15. Charlotte's chief engineer, a highly composed expert named Dr. Patricia Solis, handled the pre-show presentation with absolutely flawless precision. She guided the well-dressed crowd through the complex city navigation test architecture, the crucial safety verification protocols, and the flashy data metrics they'd watch on the big screens during the live run. The suited crowd looked attentive and optimistic. 3 major automotive partners had already used their massive legal teams to signal they were totally ready to sign. Assuming no hidden flaws ruined the shiny demonstration. Jason Hunter sat nearby with his associates, wearing a perfectly masked expression of polite interest. At 12:17, the live feed illuminated all 6 massive overhead video screens. The sleek autonomous vehicle. a heavily modified sedan packed with sensors and running Meridian's exclusive guidance software. It began navigating a pristine, simulated urban grid at their New Jersey testing lab, beaming the video straight into that wealthy conference room. For 90 seconds it looked flawless on the surface, perfect lane discipline. It yielded perfectly at the polished intersections. Sharp, accurate responses to fake pedestrians at crosswalks. The whole room started relaxing into easy approval. Watch this. At 12:19 and 40 seconds, the car's behavior totally shifted. It blew past a stop point without even slowing down. It misread a parked object, swerving toward it before a clumsy correction. It went totally deaf to override commands from the monitoring station for 11 terrifying seconds, during which it was speeding at 32 miles per hour through a fake neighborhood. The giant overhead screens flashed with endless cascading error warnings. The room fell dead silent. You know that heavy quiet right before a massive career-ending disaster. Dr. Solis sat at the monitoring desk, her face frozen in sheer controlled panic. Her fingers flew across the keyboard, but nothing she tried was fixing the problem. Jason Hunter gave himself exactly 2 seconds of fake worry before smoothing his perfectly groomed face into the smug look of a guy who always claimed the tech was garbage and was now proven right. But down below, underestimated Mason was already working. The split second that first weird signal popped into the car's guidance feed. 48 seconds before it even showed up upstairs. His humble DB5 system flagged the attack, and Mason fired back with a defense protocol he spent 3 hours perfectly tuning for Meridian's exact network setup. The little machine fired a directed, jamming wave across the exact radio frequency Hunter's flashy team was using to inject their dirty code. The toxic data feed died instantly. The car's real software took the wheel back. But something much more important was happening behind the scenes. Mason's dusty old rig had quietly tracked every single hack, timestamping it and sealing it with cryptographic proof, and firing that full file with the source details straight to those big 6 screens in the boardroom. Suddenly, those terrifying red errors vanished. A crisp, undeniable diagram popped up, tracing the entire cyber attack step by step. It showed the exact entry point, the dirty payload, and the target inside Meridian. But more importantly, the source was verified and completely undeniable. The attacking server belonged to Helios Automotive, legally registered to the polished corporate account of Jason Hunter. The fancy executive stared in dead silence for 3 seconds. Then absolute unfiltered chaos broke out. An auto executive jumped up. A politician's helper started frantically dialing their phone. Hunter's 2 expensive lawyers were already sneaking toward the door. Hunter just sat totally frozen in the 3rd row, and for the very first time since anyone had heard his famous name. His $1 million face wasn't faking anything anymore. He just looked like a man watching his mighty, arrogant empire get destroyed by a basement nobody in under 60 seconds. Up front, Charlotte stayed quiet. We've all learned this lesson. True power doesn't always wear a tailored suit. Dr. Solis called out from the monitoring desk that the car was driving perfectly again. Their unflashy real guidance software had never made a single mistake, and that the solid proof flashing overhead showed a massive corporate hack that got completely blocked and recorded live by the unassuming underdog. She never even glanced back at Hunter's expensive suit. Frankly, she didn't have to. The aftermath of that shiny ceremony was cold and deliberate. Official statements were made, legal holds dropped. The flashy corporate partners signed their papers and left. But Jason Hunter, he was already gone when the cops arrived. He slipped through the crowd smoothly. You and I know true danger rarely looks flashy, it just plans for exits. By the time Charlotte's expensive security team hit the lobby, he had completely vanished. His well-dressed associates, however, were suddenly very eager to cooperate. People drop the tough act fast when they realize how bad the alternative is, and what they revealed to the authorities during the following 2 hours just proved what unassuming Mason had already pieced together himself. But Hunter was a ghost, hiding resources across 3 different jurisdictions. He clearly guessed that this polished afternoon might actually end up looking incredibly ugly. Charlotte, the CEO, got a call from her top guard at 2:47, confirming Hunter didn't run to his fancy house or his corner office. Instead, he was last spotted in some generic car heading uptown. The second call, that was from Mason. He was down in the loading dock, running his old car. He'd told her to come down immediately, but ordered the CEO to leave her expensive phone behind. She knew not to doubt him. She dropped the phone. They hit the West Side Highway in 15 flat. That beat-up car slipped through afternoon traffic wearing the absolute perfect disguise of old beaters in a city where nobody watches ugly, forgotten cars. C. Mason quietly tracked Hunter's signal using a hidden relay that Hunter's device was, blindly feeding right back into the counterintelligence grid. Mason calmly explained it was a hidden flaw inside the flashy tech Hunter loved using. An exploit Mason kept secretly filed away for years, just waiting for the right moment. Mason always had that quiet, invisible patience. 6 minutes past the Lincoln Tunnel, our tail arrived. Let's look closer at this. A menacing black SUV, 2 guys inside keeping a gap that looked coldly professional. Mason saw the threat long before the CEO noticed anything. She only knew because his grip shifted on the worn steering wheel. She was finally learning to read his calm preparation instead of seeing just nervous tension. He never told her to panic. He just warned her to grab that cheap plastic handle and keep her expensive shoes glued to the floor. What happens next isn't some loud Hollywood chase. Watch this with me. No blown red lights or screaming pedestrians scattering. It was cold, calculated, and far more deliberately executed. Mason triggered a thermal mist through the rear vents of his seemingly harmless old car. A quiet fog that totally blinded their high-tech sensors, throwing up a dense smokescreen at 40 meters. He swung onto the Cross Bronx ramp without even hitting the blinker. Deep inside the dark interchange tunnel, where the city's flashy tracking grids couldn't see them, he flipped on the beater's hidden signal jammer. A local pulse that fried any fancy tracking signals within a 12-meter radius, effectively making the humble DB5 vanish entirely from any high-tech GPS network trying to lock onto its signature. That expensive SUV burst through the mist in the completely wrong interchange lane. By the time they finally corrected course, the old car was 3 turns away, smartly pacing the pursuers from a parallel street instead. The CEO exhaled a breath she had been trapping in her chest for 45 long seconds. Mason noted Hunter's men looked professional, but they were blindly reacting to an underestimated old car, which meant Hunter's crew was always reacting to what we just did, instead of anticipating our next move. Mason told me that was the massive advantage we had, and we needed to exploit it before Hunter realized his mistake and took back control. Hunter had sent the hit squad, Mason explained. Not to hurt us directly, at least not yet, but to locate something. Hunter knew this old DB5 existed. He knew about the original prototype project from 12 years back. He knew it was missing. And he spent years assuming it was either destroyed or locked away somewhere impossible to reach. Seeing this rusty relic dismantle, his year of careful planning in under 60 seconds had completely shattered his assumptions. Hunter wasn't running from the cops yet. He was rushing towards something he had to destroy before the authorities caught him. I sat there in the passenger seat of that beaten-up gray Aston Martin, cruising through the Bronx on a clear October afternoon. I thought about the arrogant version of myself who had stepped out of my Bentley that morning, handing a compensation check to a man I instantly judged and dismissed. I thought about the pitiful Mason Carter I had invented in my head, the cheap car, his worn-out jacket, the little girl on those steps. And I understood with a sharp clarity that, honestly, embarrassed me, just how completely wrong I was in every single assumption. Not because those quick judgments were unusual, but because they were the exact kind of judgments I built my entire career on. Quick assessments, confident labels, fast action. You and I both know they work in corporate business. But I had been operating in the completely wrong context for a very long time. I found out about Mason's late wife not from him but from Patricia Solis. She had stayed totally silent during the afternoon's chaos, until she caught me alone in the hallway outside the legal briefing room at 4:15. Patricia worked at Meridian for 5 years. She came from a heavy defense contractor background I always found useful, without ever digging into the details. Patricia told me quietly and right to the point that she recognized Mason's name from a technical review board she served on about 8 years ago. a special panel brought together to investigate safety failures in a classified vehicle defense program. She admitted she had no idea the man was still active, and she said she was so sorry for what happened to his wife. The facts were incredibly vague, the way classified government files always are. The basic summary without the substance, the what minus the why. The fatal crash happened on a highway just outside Richmond, Virginia. The vehicle suffered a massive guidance system failure, the exact kind of crash that, knowing what I now know about Jason Hunter and his dirty methods, looked exactly like murder. The official investigation blamed the auto collision on a faulty factory steering part. The parts supplier paid a quiet settlement, and the file was closed forever. Mason was only 300 meters away when it happened. He got the horrible call right in the middle of a debriefing and was ordered by their legal team within 24 hours to keep quiet about the incident to anyone outside official channels. I stood there in that empty hallway, letting the heavy truth finally sink in. I thought about Mason handling that crisis. You really can't judge appearances. Real power doesn't show off, no wasted energy, no performance. Charlotte pictured the man's little girl on those brownstone steps, reading her tablet, just a kid, right, but with this calm focus. You look closely, you see a child trained never to expect the world's favors, perfectly unshaken when it ignores her. She reconsidered Mason, 7 years building a masterpiece system alone, using his own cash, while looking like just another struggling dad. His brilliant mind. His quiet patience for a grand purpose he never felt the need to explain or prove to a single soul. She began that day holding $1.4 billion in deals. She thought a fancy suit meant she held all the cards. She always assumed she could price tag every room before walking inside. But she'd completely misjudged the true worth of everything real. Catching up to his unassuming car, she asked Mason what their shiny rival Hunter was desperately racing to find. He mentioned an abandoned manufacturing plant up in the gritty industrial zone just north of the Harlem River, a rundown spot that originally belonged to the massive consortium 12 years back. It had quietly changed hands twice after the project collapsed. Now it sat hidden behind some invisible shell corporation. Dig through 4 layers of fake companies and you'd find a secret fund managed by our wealthy friend, Jason Hunter. Charlotte asked what priceless secret hid there. Mason revealed it held the final complete archive of the core sabotage data. Not some cheap copy or derivative. The priceless original. He said Hunter hoarded it for 12 years not for some daily business use, but because someday that hidden dirt would grant the man ultimate power over someone terrified of letting the truth surface. She asked why a smart guy like Mason waited so long. He explained that striking before tonight meant looking like the bad guy. He would have surfaced the evidence entirely alone, without a reliable witness or legal backing, missing the clear context to make the complete truth visible, instead of just the ugly parts that framed him perfectly. He knew exactly how society treats whistleblowers when they expose ugly truths before the world is actually ready to look past the surface. But tonight changed everything. Tonight brought hard records, credible witnesses in suits, and a locked chain of legal custody. And a ruthless sabotage plot already handed over to serious federal investigators. Tonight, claiming that forgotten archive meant finally winning the war, not just surviving it. You and I might drive past this facility and just see another abandoned dump, kept upright enough to dodge lawsuits, completely hiding the gold mine inside. Just a rusty metal shed spanning 40,000 square feet, hidden behind a cheap chain-link fence in a bleak industrial wasteland that the city's flashy developers entirely ignored as worthless. The rusty access gate sat locked, but the heavy locks had been swapped within the past 18 months. A shiny new padlock on cheaple chains, that tiny detail told Mason everything about the hidden activity inside. He cut his vintage car's engine 3 blocks away, gliding silently into shadows beneath a shattered street lamp. This regular-looking dad spent 4 minutes running high-tech, passive sweeps and thermal imaging, mapping signal densities and tracking perimeter motion before he even breathed a word. Finally, he warned Charlotte about 4 armed men hiding inside, 2 guarding the dark northeast corner, and 2 flanking what the blueprints called the main server room, true value heavily guarded. Hunter was inside. The thermal scan looked just like a regular employee punching the clock. Without hesitating, they slipped in through a battered, worthless-looking loading dock on the south side. Mason bypassed an ugly mechanical override panel he knew flawlessly. He kept the original dusty facility blueprints for a moment exactly like this. The inside reeked of cheap concrete dust and stale machine oil. The air was freezing and dead, typical of massive warehouses boarded up against the elements. The cheap overhead fluorescent lights barely worked. They threw harsh strips of pale light across the concrete, interrupted by long stretches of shadow. They stuck quietly to those shadows. Mason moved confidently without checking a screen. Charlotte realized immediately this wasn't his first tour. Maybe not recently, but that layout was permanently etched into his brain with absolute precision. They finally cornered Hunter in the server room. He stood at a terminal using hardware that looked like absolute junk. 12 years ago it was premium, but now it seemed completely worthless. The massive data server stacks surrounding him were the original project framework. Bulky physical servers, nothing was virtual. You and I know true value isn't flashy. This data was too dangerous to ever touch the public internet. Hunter heard them walk in, turned around, and didn't even flinch. He just stared back at Mason with the smug, arrogant expression of a man who had been expecting this fight for a very long time. He fully believed he held all the leverage, judging solely by what he saw. He smiled, saying he wondered how long it would actually take Mason to show up. He brushed off the afternoon as just a minor fender bender on the road to a bigger payout. He claimed those ancient-looking servers behind him held enough value to rebuild his entire empire. To start completely fresh using fake names and wealthier partners. And Mason was welcome to go cry about it to absolutely anyone who cared. Because the undeniable proof of what had happened 12 years back was locked in a format only Hunter's highly specific key could unlock. One wrong move and that fragile-looking hardware would instantly erase every single asset. He said this with total arrogance because that was exactly how he built it. For 12 years his ugly defenses had been bulletproof. Mason stayed quiet, then he smirked and told Hunter he was valuing the completely wrong asset. Hunter's smug face dropped, not to panic, but to the rapid recalculation of an arrogant man realizing the cheap, old asset he totally wrote off was actually about to completely bankrupt him. Mason tapped the worn interior panel of his DB5's control module. It looked like pure scrap metal on his shoulder, but suddenly the server room's display screens, all 6 massive monitors lining the walls, woke up and started flashing data. Not the files Hunter was so fiercely protecting. It was the evidence Mason gathered for 12 long years, the communication logs, the shady equipment receipts, the hidden maintenance access timestamps, the weird signal glitches from the night of the Virginia crash, the dirty financial transfers, the shell company trails, all signed, perfectly verified, dated, and already actively transmitting. That cheap-looking DB5 had been uploading through an encrypted satellite relay since they breached the building. Looks deceive. This archive wasn't downloading to some cheap local hard drive. It was dumping straight into the laps of 3 federal agencies. The polished lawyers from that afternoon's flashy signing ceremony were finally seeing the hidden truth, plus 4 investigative journalists Mason had quietly kept in his address book for 11 years. Hunter stared at the flashing screens, then underestimated Mason again. He glanced at the doorway, shocked to see Charlotte standing right there. He lunged for the physical server wipe switch, a brute force override meant to smash through any digital defense. Mason's hidden brilliance anticipated this. Plus, the unassuming DB5 fired an electromagnetic pulse straight through the control system, causing a massive power spike in the hidden wiring that tripped the main circuit breaker right before Hunter even touched that switch. The entire room went pitch black for 2 long seconds. When the emergency lights flickered on, powered by a hidden backup circuit, Hunter stood frozen, the switch untouched. The invisible data transfer was already completely finished. Charlotte captured every single word spoken inside that room, using the deceptive little microphone inside Mason's device. That hidden audio was permanently locked right into the archive. Hunter's own voice openly admitting the ugly truth behind the polished data. It was all heading to folks who would expose the reality behind his shiny facade by tomorrow morning. Defeated Hunter sank into the chair by the terminal. His arrogant voice was completely silenced. Federal agents swarmed the fancy corporate facility 41 minutes later. Mason simply waited by his worn-out classic car outside, never stepping back inside. Let's jump ahead 3 weeks after that night, shall we? Charlotte faced her wealthy board of directors, delivering a truth that shattered their comfortable illusions. Stripping away the corporate polish to reveal real, raw honesty. She exposed the secret signing disaster and the unexpected tech hidden on her ruined car. The massive invisible flaws buried deep inside her own company's security systems, and which seemingly loyal board members had actually been betraying them for the past 18 months. 2 of those two-faced executives quit before the meeting ended. The third suit was sent straight to the corporate lawyers. She absolutely refused to sugarcoat the ugly reality with pretty words. She laid out the bare truth, letting the shock settle. Then she phoned Mason the following Monday. He picked up on ring 3. "You and I know he's just a dad, his daughter asking about a school project nearby." Charlotte told him she needed to apologize sincerely, and she actually did. Not with the empty polish of a quick business deal, but with the raw truth of someone admitting a terrible misjudgment. She confessed she judged his rugged exterior back on 48th Street, totally blind to the brilliant man standing right in front of her. Judging that book by its worn cover almost cost her entire empire. He quietly said he appreciated it. He didn't brush it off just to be polite, because real harm was done, and he never hid behind empty, fake social pleasantries. Then, she made him an offer. Her massive company would officially license the brilliant security architecture Mason built, under his exact terms, putting his rightful name directly on the patent, requiring his personal blessing for any launch, and a massive payout reflecting the immense true worth of his mind, completely ignoring the scruffy, depreciated way he looked to the superficial outside world. She named the massive dollar amount. He just stayed perfectly quiet. Finally, he simply told her he would think it over. 3 days later, he returned with a surprising counteroffer. "You see, true value isn't always about money. Stick with me here." He agreed to a consulting arrangement. No flashy licensing deal, no massive corporate acquisition. His terms were strict. He kept full control, restricting the software to safety and protection, rather than any commercial tracking or corporate surveillance use. He built the entire system just to protect everyday people. And that was the only context where he would ever allow his life's work used. Charlotte agreed instantly, no negotiations. It was her first business deal in 9 years without ruthlessly shifting the terms in her favor and the absolute absence of. That shark instinct proved how discovering his hidden worth completely rewired her internal moral compass. Meridian dynamics transformed over the following months in subtle ways that weren't flashy on the surface, but you and I know everyone felt them inside. Charlotte completely restructured the Tech Oversight Committee. She fired members who only pushed the board's greedy, surface-level financial interests, replacing them with real engineers and ethicists who grasped what the software actually achieved. She ordered an independent security audit and published the raw findings without editing. She flatly rejected 2 acquisitions, massive offers from funds tied to the same toxic investment architecture Hunter previously used. She cited strict ethical concerns, making sure the entire tech industry clearly understood her firm boundaries. As for Mason, he never sought fame. He consulted on just 3 vital projects that following year, each and every time on his terms. Leaving quietly when the job was done, he never took extra credit, refusing the shiny recognition that turns a real genius into a hollow brand. His daughter actually won her school's science fair that spring, with a complex project on electromagnetic shielding in consumer vehicle design. He attended the presentation from a simple folding chair in the school gymnasium, watching her explain her complex work to the judges with the same quiet precision she clearly inherited from him. By every measure, he was exactly where he truly wanted to be. That priceless Aston Martin DB5 stayed parked outside the 48th Street brownstone. Its weathered exterior looked just as completely unremarkable as it always had. Charlotte drove past it once in her pristine car, on a rare morning when she was actually running 10 minutes early for a meeting. Which still happened, because some deep habits never change. She gently slowed down as she passed. The dull gray paint caught the morning light, making it look for just a split second like a priceless treasure, left right in plain sight for anyone wise enough to actually look past the surface. Most people simply weren't. That, Charlotte finally understood, was exactly the deeper point. You and I know the most valuable things rarely advertise themselves. They just work quietly and completely, waiting to be valued by the few who are finally looking at what truly matters.